Chapter 44. For a lad that started off with hardly any family or friends at all, our Stan's doing pretty well as he stands waiting to dive into the tank. There's Pancho, of course, weaving back and forth with a heavy velvety bag in his hand. There's Dostoevsky and Natasha, watching nervously and proudly from the front of the crowd. There's the Boar Man and the Fang Lady, and Tickle Peter and Mr. Smith, and Seabrook. There's the people Stan sat by the fire with as he ate his spud, and all the kids he's met, and all the folks that have waved and grinned at him and called out his name, and there's a whole audience of other folk watching him and wishing him well. Meanwhile, let's look back through the shadows to the potholed lane, and here they come, stumbling along hand in hand, the ones who loved him right from the start, the ones who must get here in time to see him form. Annie and Ernie. They move towards the lights, towards the music, and cries and laughter that echo in the air. "It's a fairground, Ernie," says Annie. "So it is," says Ernie. "I love a fair," says Annie, "and there was a time when you did too, remember?" "I remember," answers Ernie sadly, thinking of the fair that left the day Stan went away. Annie holds his hand tighter. "Used to be lovely, didn't it?" she said. "When we were young uns, spinning on the water, playing hook-a-duck and winning prizes, getting our fortunes told by the gypsy. 'You will meet a lovely lass.' That's what the gypsy said to me. And I did. And it was you. And she said I'd meet a tall and handsome man. And so did I. And it was you." Ernie smiles, then sighs. "And look what I've brought you to, my poor love." "Never worry, it'll turn out all right," says Annie. "Will it?" says Ernie. "Yes, it will," says a voice from behind them, "as long as your hearts are good and true." They turn, and Gypsy Rose is standing there, with the moonlight shining on her, and the distant fairground lights flashing behind her. "Don't worry," she says softly, "I'm no danger to you." Annie steps closer to her. "My name is Gypsy Rose," she tells them. "You're her," Annie exclaims, "the Gypsy Rose I met at the fair when I was just a girl. But you can't be." Gypsy Rose smiles. "No, I can't possibly be," she murmurs. "Can I? It must be a trick of the moonlight. Do you have silver with which to cross my palm?" "With nothing but copper," says Ernie. He's looking closely at her as well, her face, her figure, the clothes she wears. He's listening closely to her voice. "It is you," he whispers, "but it can't be you." Gypsy Rose smiles again. "Let us say that the moonlight is your silver." She opens her palm and lets the moonlight fall across her palm. "Thank you for it," she says. "Now open your hands and let me look." She reaches out and takes their open hands. She tells Annie and Ernie that moonlight is the purest and the most telling light. They look down together at the complicated creases and cracks and bulges there. "Oh, you have been through difficult times," says Gypsy Rose. "Times of trouble and loss and pain." Her face falls and she groans in disappointment. She turns her eyes to Ernie's face. "Oh, Ernest," she sighs. "Me?" says Ernie. "You've not always been the man you should have been." "But he's a good man," says Annie. "Is he? Can he be a good man when he has done what he has done?" "Yes, he can," replies Annie, "as he has seen the errors of his way." "Oh, has he?" "Yes, he just turned a little bit mad for a time, didn't you, Ernie?" Gypsy Rose watches him. "Well," she says. "It's true," he says. "I was led astray. I led myself astray in the search for fame and fortune." "There's madness and there's madness," says Gypsy Rose. "There's madness that does harm, but there's also madness that does good." She stares at their open palms again. "You are searching for something, or for someone, am I right?" "We had a boy," says Annie, "a boy with eyes as clear as water and a heart as bright as the moon. Will we find him, Gypsy Rose?" "Remember him and look upon the moon," says Gypsy Rose. "The moon burns brightest when it is filled with our yearning. Stare into the moon and call out with all your hearts for your lost boy." Annie and Ernie lift their eyes and stare and yearn, and they see the moon burn brighter. And just a few hundred yards away, their boy Stan steps out into the spotlight for a moment. He too stares up at the moon and yearns for his lost family, and the moon burns brighter still. And for a fleeting second they all see one another there, held within the moon's bright disk, and they call out one another's names. "Come to me," whispers Stan. "Please come to me." And Annie and Ernie say to Gypsy Rose, "Where will we find him?" But Gypsy Rose has gone, disappeared into the shadows and the darkness behind the light. So they take each other's hand and stumble onwards, hurrying towards the fair. They pass between the caravans at the edge and slip past the sideshows and the tent that looks like the world, and the wrestling booth and the wild boar cookhouse. And they're drawn towards the dense crowd at the heart of the fair, towards the gasps and laughter and the excited murmurings. They arrive at the edge of the crowd. They try to peer through. They stand on tiptoe. "What's going on?" asked Annie. "Dunno," said Ernie. "Can't see, love." Then they both see. There's a boy in a cloak standing before a great illuminated fish tank. He's lit by spotlight. "It's a boy," says Annie. "It can't be," gasps Ernie. "No, it is. It is. Stan, they call, Stan." But their voices are lost in the clamour of other voices that start to echo through the air. "Stan! Stan! Stan! Stan!" "What's he going to do?" cries Ernie. The pair try to squirm through the people standing in front of them. "It's our boy," they keep saying. "Please let us through to our boy." But their progress is slow. The people are packed in so tight. "Stan, what are you going to do?" Chapter 45. "This is the moment of truth," announces Pancho Pirelli. The crowd quietens. "You see before you," says Pancho, "a boy who was raised by the shores of the Orinoco." "We see what?" says Ernie. "The Orinoco," says Annie. "Will this extraordinary boy dance with the piranhas?" says Pancho. "Will he what?" says Ernie. "Or will he be gobbled up before your very eyes?" "What?" yells Annie. "What?" yells Ernie. "Stan," they yell together. "Stan, it's us." But the crowd is agitated again. They're muttering and shouting. They're pushing closer to the tank. Annie and Ernie still can't get through. "That's our boy," they cry. "Let us through to our boy." And others around them are saying, "He's just a lad. He's just a skinny, scrawny little kid. How can you do a thing like this?" "He can't," says Annie and Ernie. "He's just an ordinary little lovely lad." Inside himself, Stan isn't skinny or scrawny anymore. He's brave and strong and poised at the edge of something marvellous. He takes off his cloak. He starts to climb the ladder. The fish swim upwards. Stan pauses at the top. He lowers his goggles. He raises his hand to wave, and the crowd turns silent, except for a pair of horrified voices. "Stan! Stan, what on earth are you doing?" Stan stops dead and listens. He lifts the goggles and scans the crowd, and he sees them waving desperately at him, trying to make their way to him. They call his name again and again. His heart is filled with joy. "Auntie Annie," he shouts. "Uncle Ernie." "Don't do it, son," yells Annie. "Get down, Stan," yells Ernie. Stan laughs. He pulls the goggles down again. "Don't worry," he calls. "I'm doing it for you." "We don't want you to do it for us," yells Ernie. Stan laughs again. "Watch," he calls. He spreads his arms wide. He leaps, brings the hands together, curves forward and down, and makes a perfect dive into the piranha tank. The fish part as if they're welcoming one of their own into the shoal. They swim downwards with Stan as he completes his dive. They swim upwards as he kicks himself up from the bottom of the tank. They behave exactly as if Pancho Pirelli or Pedro Perdito in the water with them. Stan spins and they swirl in perfect order around him. He hangs still at the centre of the tank, and they separate into perfect groups on either side of him. He sways and they sway. He dances and they dance. He swims to the surface, gulps air, and swims back down again. He gazes out through his goggles, and they gaze back at him. "Oh, Oh, my companions, he whispers inside himself. Oh, our companion, he hears. He tumbles and somersaults and twists, and it is at home in there with the lethal piranhas in the floodlit water. The people watch him in wonder. They gather closer, closer. They'll see this in their dreams for evermore. And Ernie and Annie are mesmerised, their fears turning to excitement and joy. Look what he can do, they tell each other. That's Stan, they tell the people all around them. That's our precious boy. Oh, wouldn't his mum and dad have been proud, breathes Annie. Stan swims upwards and gulps air again. He swims back down again. He thinks of the 13th fish and the 13th fish's companions. He has a vision of a tin marked, Pot's gorgeous glittering goldfish. He sees the tin opening, the lid curling back, and a dozen goldfish pour out from it in a burst of brilliant flickering gold to swim with him and the piranhas. And as they swim there in perfect order, the savage piranhas, the timid goldfish, and the scrawny boy. Stan looks out through the wall of the tank and sees his friends and his family, all blending into one. Dostoevsky and Natasha, Pancho Pacelli, Auntie Annie and Uncle Ernie. And he sees for a fleeting moment, closest of all to the tank, his mum and dad. They smile and wave at him and mouth, "We're so proud of you, Stan. We love you, Stan." And then they're gone. Stan swims up to the surface. He grips the ladder. He climbs out. He stands there and bows. The crowd roars and roars. And then Stan climbs out, back down, and rushes into the arms of Annie and Ernie Potts.
Chapter 46. So let's say hurrah for Stanley Potts. He's a boy that's become a different kind of boy. He's the scrawny kid who grew up with all kinds of trouble, fishiness and daftness, but who's brave and bold enough to be the hero of this tale. His life is opened up before him. He'll swim with piranhas night after night. He won't get eaten. Piranhas aren't really that dangerous after all, or not if we are to believe Pancho Pirelli. Maybe in a while Stan will leave the piranhas behind, find other challenges to face. Maybe he'll go to the Amazon and the Orinoco. Maybe he'll go to Siberia and Ashby de la Zouch. Certainly he'll keep on finding other ways to grow, and he'll become an even different kind of Stanley Potts. And his family, that has become such a different kind of family, will grow and change along with him. There they all are, celebrating together happily, with the cheering crowd around them. Pancho draws the tarpaulin back across the tank. Now they'll all head towards the hooker duck, where they'll light a fire, nibble scorching spuds, and drink black pop. Let's let them go. Let's leave them to their celebrations and their memories, and their plans for splendid futures. The crowd disperses. The lights start to dim. The moon drops towards the horizon, and the endless stars in the endless darkness glitter and glow. Every heart beats faster. Every eye is shining. Every mind contains the seeds of weird and wonderful dreams. Even Tickle Peter, after all his years of glumness, smiles. Oh, and here they come, out of the shadows, moving into the spaces left behind by the happy ones. Clarence P. Clapp and his daft lads, Doug and Alf and Fred and Ted. Look, they're sneaking towards the fish tank. Could it be that Clarence P. is about to prove that they aren't piranhas after all? They're getting closer. They're lifting the tarpaulin. They're laughing at the tiny tiddlers. They're jeering and mocking as daft lads do. Oh, and look, Clarence P. is already on the ladder. He's climbing up. Surely he's not going to jump into the... What do you think should happen? Should Clarence P. jump in? Maybe it doesn't matter if he does. Maybe the piranhas will prove to be tiny tiddlers after all. But maybe Clarence P. should get gobbled up. After all, Clarence P. and Doug and Alf and Fred and Ted aren't exactly angels, are they? They've done some pretty nasty stuff in their story. Look what they did to Annie and Ernie. Imagine what they did to that poor motorist. Imagine the bother they're going to cause in the future. And Clarence P., who's nearly at the top of the ladder now, is the boss. Some would say, of course, that blokes like Clarence P. and the daft lads are just misled. Maybe they had troubled childhoods. Maybe there are a few important cells missing from their brains. Maybe they need some counselling, or to have some music played to them, or somebody just to give them a good cuddle. I can't decide. Anyway, Clarence looks down at the piranhas. He looks down at the lads. "Jump in, boss," says Doug. "These is just tiddlers," said Alf. "Jump," says Fred. "Well said, Fred," says Ted. Clarence P. is now at the edge. It's up to you. If you were writing the story, what would you make happen? Does he jump? And if he jumps, what happens next? Maybe it will help to think about what Stanley Potts, the hero of our story, might make Clarence P. do. Or maybe it doesn't really matter at all. Whatever you decide, this is just a story. Clarence P. Clapp only exists in the pages of this book and in that mysterious place, your imagination. Anyway, decide now if you'd like to. Then there's one last little chapter to bring us in to the end. Chapter 47. Of course, there's never really a proper end. The people who've lived through this tale will live through many more. But we have to come to a halt somewhere, and this is it. Let's rise and fly. Let's leave behind the fairground field and everybody in it. Let's go higher, higher. The field of its lights and noise diminishes. We see the town spread out beyond it, and the strings of light linking this to other glowing towns and cities. We see the darkness of the silent countryside, the gleaming tracks of meandering rivers. We see the deep, dark sea. We go higher and see the galaxies of cities scattered across the world. We see the great tracts of wilderness. We see the oceans and the snow-capped peaks of mountains. And oh, we go so high we see the whole world itself. Just look at that great and gorgeous sphere of light and dark. See how it turns, how day gives way to night and night to day. See how the sea shines blue beneath the sun and glow darkly beneath the moon. Imagine the people and the stories that can be found upon that sphere. Imagine the lives and the deaths and the loves and the dreams and the troubles and the heroes and the villains that exist down there. Imagine the story after story after story that can be found and told. Let's go even higher so that even our great world diminishes, because just one world among many, many others spinning in the endless dark. How many stories now in all this endlessness? But let's return for one last glance. Down we go. The earth and its geography comes back into clear view. Where shall we go? Look, it's morning in Siberia. The sun gleams on the snow. There's ice on the rivers, and smoke rises from the chimneys of houses and villages spread out across the steppe. Here's a great city by a river, the city of Novosibirsk. Go closer. The air's bright and clear, and it's bitterly cold. There's the broad river Ob. Look at the skyscrapers and the huge railway station painted pale green. There's a mighty arch as an entrance. Let's go inside. How busy it is in here. People milling about, trains waiting at platforms. There's a bunch of slender women heading towards one. They wear thick coats, fur hats. Their breath condenses in the bitter air. They're laughing. See that face, that figure? She looks familiar. We've seen her in a photograph, I believe. Yes, she does look lovely. Is it Natasha's mother? Is it Mrs. Dostoevsky? She's laughing, chatting. She's talking of home, of going home again. She jumps aboard and the others follow, and soon the train pulls out of the station. Maybe she is going home. Maybe there's a little more joy heading the way of Stanley Potts and his pals in their distant fairground. Let's hope so. They deserve it. After all, the hearts of these people, despite all their troubles and all their faults and failings, are good and true. The end.